For my grandmother's entire life, she had this reoccurring nightmare. In this nightmare, she would be walking down a long, dark hallway. She'd turn left, open a door, and see this terrible thing. She'd always wake up before seeing what it really was. In her 40s, she and her husband, my dad, and my aunt were on vacation. They booked a hotel at the last minute, so they ended up having to get 2 rooms with 2 twin beds on the opposite sides of the floor. My dad wakes up around 3 a.m. and can automatically tell something's not right. He calls out in the darkness, "Dad?" No response. He turns on the bedside light. "Dad," he says, a little louder this time. Still no response. Getting worried, he slides out of bed and shakes his father, but he doesn't wake up. My dad ran down the hotel hallway to my grandma's room and started banging on the door. My grandma worriedly opens the door, and my dad shouts, "Something's wrong with Dad." He leads her down the hallway. It's a long hallway. To the last door on the left, my grandmother reaches the door, turns to left, and sees her husband dead in bed. Heart attack. She never had the dream again. Hi guys, welcome to my holo. I'm Hans. For the past few weeks, I've been feeling like something's watching me. But instead of confronting my fears, I've gathered some of the creepiest stories I've found online, plus a few I found on my own. So close those lights, get in bed, and listen closely. I've had my dog Max for about 5 years. He's a lazy, sweet old mutt who spends most of his day sleeping in sunbeams and only barks when the mailman shows up. That's why I thought it was strange when, about 2 weeks ago, he woke me up in the middle of the night, barking like someone was breaking in. I glanced at the clock, 3:17 a.m. At first, I figured it was a raccoon or maybe a deer in the backyard. I live on the edge of a wooded area, so it's not uncommon. But when I stumbled into the kitchen, what I saw outside my sliding glass door was just darkness. That's what Max saw too, at least at first, because he was locked on. He wasn't barking, his ears were forward, tail stiff, eyes fixed on a single point out there in that dark. I turned on the porch light. Nothing. I told him to knock it off. I pulled him away from the door and went back to bed. But the next night, 3:17 a.m., same exact time, same exact spot. I started to get curious. I checked the yard during the day, no tracks, no signs of an animal. I even closed the blinds one night, thinking maybe he was reacting to his own reflection. Didn't matter, because at 3:17 a.m., he was at that door again, growling low this time in his throat. So, a few nights ago, I decided to stay up. I sat in the dark with him, watching the backyard through the glass. At 3:16 a.m., Max's ears perked up. His breathing changed. His eyes, they started following something along the tree line. I couldn't see a damn thing, but then, and I swear, every sound outside just stopped. No wind, no crickets. It was like the whole world held its breath. Max's growl deepened, and then it was over. Whatever it was gone. Max relaxed, wagged his tail, and went back to bed like nothing happened. And that's when I decided to check my security camera footage. Most of it was boring until I got to 3:17 a.m. At first, I thought it was a raccoon, this little lump moving near the glass. But then, it stood up, human height, skin pale, arms just way too long, and it just stood there, inches from the glass, staring into my kitchen. Then it moved. It didn't walk away, it crawled, bent backwards at its waist, its hands and feet dragging it into the tree line without ever breaking eye contact with the camera. Max wasn't trying to scare it off. He was warning me. I haven't slept through the night since. Last night, Max growled again, but this time, the window in my bedroom. It was around 2 a.m., that liminal, empty hour when the whole street is dead and quiet. I was lying in bed, drifting off, when I heard it. A voice. At first, I thought it was one of those other tenants watching TV late, but it wasn't just random chatter. It was steady, calm, almost like a conversation. Only there was no one in the room next to mine. I mean, there hasn't been since I moved in. I pressed my ear against the wall. It was too muffled to make out the words, but the cadence, the pauses, the rises and falls, it felt weirdly familiar. Not that it mattered, because I had class the next day. I went right back to my bed and went to sleep. On the second night, I didn't want to admit it, but I was spooked about the night before. I kept the lights on. I was half watching YouTube on my laptop, half listening to the wall, making sure the sound was real. Because at around 1:47 a.m., it started again. But not just one voice now, two. One was definitely familiar, almost like my own voice. Now hear me out, I don't mean someone who sounded like me. I mean me, the exact tone and rhythm, but the other voice was deeper, slower. It didn't sound friendly. I muted my laptop. The moment I did, they both went silent. On the third night, I decided to catch this on my phone. I left the recorder running and pretended to be asleep. And about an hour in, there it was again. The conversation was just wrong. The me voice would say something I hadn't said yet, like it was rehearsing. Then the deeper voice would correct it. I swear I heard him say,
"No, they say it slower."
On the fourth night, I couldn't take it. I knocked on the wall hard. The voices stopped mid-sentence. For maybe 30 seconds, nothing. Then, a single knock back. But here's the thing. The sound didn't come from the exact spot I knocked. It came from right behind my headboard, a place where there is no room, only a solid wall. Safe to say I barely slept that night. Because on night 5, I decided to confront the landlord, but she just laughed at me when I mentioned the room next to mine.
Some rooms don't take to new people,
She said. It'd been empty since the last tenant left 20 years ago. That night, the voices didn't wait until after midnight. They started promptly around 11 p.m. I whispered to myself, "This is insane." From the wall, my voice whispered back,
this is insane.
On the 6th night, I made a mistake. I tried speaking directly to it. I asked, "Who are you?" For a long time, silence. Then the deeper voice, clear and close enough to hear through the wall,
"I'm almost ready."
That was it. No more words that night, just the sound of slow, heavy breathing on the other side of the wall until dawn. And now, we're on the last night, where I just woke up. It's 3:04 a.m., complete silence right now. No pipes, No hum, not even the faint traffic noise I always hear from the street. Someone's knocking. There's a voice, speaking clearly from just behind the wall. Open the door. My skin's crawling. There's no door to that room from the hallway. The only entrance is bricked over. I'm frozen right now. The voice is repeating, open the door. And then I hear the deeper voice now.
No, they come in here.
The wall behind my headboard, it's creaking, like someone's leaning in from the other side. I swear. Way back in 5th grade or so, I discovered this Pokemon-themed chat room in Yahoo. There were maybe 15 regulars, mostly kids aged 12 to 16. We'd spend hours role-playing anime characters and storylines, just lost in our little world. I got to know a few people well enough to chat on AIM, or sometimes on the phone. Some of these friendships lasted years. But one of these guys was different. He was obsessed with creatures and monsters, Godzilla, Spawn, all that kind of stuff. He believed in cryptids like chupacabras, which I thought was silly, but he was dead serious about it. He lived way out in the boonies, some western state. After 100 or so hours on the phone, he decided to tell me something dark. He said sometimes he would black out and wake up hurting animals or even kids. He told me about cousins and neighbors that he'd hurt, animals he killed, and honestly, it was sickening. I love animals. Just hearing that chilled me to the bone. He said what he was about to say was really hard for him, and that I was one of the only people he trusted enough to tell. Because then, it got weirder. Someone in his family thought he was possessed. They decided to perform an exorcism. It happened at night. In a dark room lit only by candles, they tied him to the bed because they didn't know how the demon would react. He was choking up telling me this part. His voice was trembling, full of fear and shame. He described this ritual, the chanting, the holy water being spurt on him, the smell of burnt sage. But then the worst part. At the end of the ritual, they heard something hit the floor under the bed when the demon left. Then something scrabbled, claws scraping across the floor, out of the room, vanishing into the darkness. He swore to me this was serious, that it cured him, because after that night, he never hurt anything anymore. I, as any sane person would, noped right the hell out of that situation. I never talked to him again. I have a couple of stories, but this one always gets me. It's one that's stuck with me for over 3 decades now. When I was about 7 years old, my grandmother was taking care of a baby boy whose mother was caught in a terrible cycle of addiction. She struggled with drugs and alcohol, and her life was chaotic for her. The poor kid, let's call him John, was often left in my grandmother's care. Sometimes she'd bring him over and just leave him there for weeks, sometimes even months. Now, John technically wasn't family, but over time, he became like one. He had this quiet, gentle spirit that just drew us all in. We didn't think of him as a visitor or a foster child. He was just another member of our chaotic, loving household. John was maybe 2 to 3 years old then, a little guy with big, curious eyes and a faint scar above his right eyebrow. I remember how he'd follow my grandmother around, gripping her hand tightly like she was the safest place on earth. The house was small and crowded, but somehow it felt warm with John there. One night, though, things took a turn that none of us could have prepared for. John's mother came to pick him up. She had a new boyfriend, a rough-looking man with sharp eyes, and a permanent scowl. We didn't like him much, but since John's mother was unstable, there wasn't much of a choice. They got into a car. My grandmother watched them drive down the road. Something about it just felt wrong. Maybe it was the way John's mother was slurring her words, or the way her boyfriend was gripping the steering wheel like he was trying to choke it. A few hours later, the phone rang.
Hello?
The car flipped on the highway, and John's mother and new boyfriend immediately died. But John was still alive, albeit in a deep coma. For 3 days, we waited fervently for updates on John, until the last night. My brother burst into the living room, screaming and crying, something I'd never seen before. His voice cracked as he yelled, "John's dead! John's dead!" The entire house snapped awake in an instant. Panic spread like wildfire. My parents rushed to him, confused but still trying to calm his frantic sobs. Through his tears, he told them something that still haunts me. He said John had come into his room just now, crying, scared, and saying he had to leave, but was afraid to go alone. John wanted my brother to come with him. I remember how confused my parents looked, trying to soothe him with logic, telling him it was just a bad dream, a nightmare brought on by stress or maybe watching too many scary shows. But before they could even finish, this time it was my uncle, calling from the hospital. He told us that, after fighting for his life, John had just died. The timing still gives me goosebumps. My 4-year-old daughter was supposed to be asleep when I heard noises coming from her bedroom upstairs. At first, I couldn't make out what was being said, just quiet whispers and murmurs. I crept closer to listen. But as soon as I got near, the talking stopped. Thinking I'd scared her, I opened the door. At the time, she was sharing the room with her 3-year-old sister. I saw my 4-year-old sitting up in the bed. I smiled and asked if everything was okay. She said she was fine, but then her little sister chimed in. They said they were being kept awake. By who? I asked. The girl in the window. She said you were coming, my daughter said, sorrily admitting she had been talking. I felt my heart stop for a moment. I asked, who was this girl? And both girls said that she comes to stand by the window at night and talks to them. I didn't know what to say, so I just said, okay, tucked them in and stayed outside their door for a while. The next day, I asked about the girl again. They said she had come back, but she was angry. I waited a few days before asking again. My 4-year-old said the girl in the window was still angry. After that, I tried to forget about it for nearly a week, until my wife asked, who are the girls talking to upstairs? Panicked, I ran upstairs and found both girls sitting beneath the window staring up at it. They turned to look up at me and asked if I wanted to meet the girl. When I shook my head, disappointed, they told me she had left. It's been about 5 years since then, and I haven't heard anything about the girl in the window again. Those are the scary stories I have for you guys tonight. If you like what you're hearing, consider subscribing because we release new videos once, twice, or even 3 times a week. I'll see you guys next week, but until then, have a horrible sleep. Shh.